All right, and welcome to the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community. I'm your host, Guru Nishan. And before we begin today and I introduce our guest for episode 7, I want to share with you the intentions that I've come up with for why I started this podcast. Our community matters to me, and I love you all, and I love us. So the intentions, which are organic and can change along the way, are number one, to break the veil of silence that has long permeated and continues to strangle the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community in the name of neutrality. Number two, to validate and help clarify the complex feelings of those who have joined this lifestyle, were born and raised into it, and or have practiced or taught Kundalini Yoga. Number three, to encourage active listening to uncomfortable conversations from our community as a revolutionary act of self and collective healing. Number four, to let survivors know that we see them, we believe them, we love them, and we will fight for their truth to be addressed. Number five, to let teachers who are denying, gaslighting, or spiritually bypassing know that what they are doing is willfully ignorant and re-traumatizing victims. Number six, to illuminate the inherent racism, homophobia, cultural misappropriation, and exploitation that perpetuates the teachings, 3HO lifestyle, and overall community ethos. Number seven, to stop the perpetuation of gaslighting and victim shaming by naming it for what it is. Number eight, to dismantle internalized shame, guilt, toxic positivity, and light-washing mentality. Number nine, to honor all of the parts of ourselves that have been forgotten or silenced. Number 10, to honor every body that has come through our community, both named and unnamed. And number 11, to encourage people to do their own research, process their own emotions, get somatic therapy and other support as needed, to draw your own conclusions and be critical thinkers rather than just blindly follow anyone. Your story matters. Please share it when you're ready. We're here to listen and support you. So I want to welcome our guest for today. His name is HarGobind Khalsa. He was born in Baltimore, Maryland, in the ashram in 1988. His family moved to the Herndon ashram when he was 4. He attended school in India for 10 years. Then he worked as the assistant to the principal at Midi Pidi Academy from 2006 to 2010. For the past few years, he's lived in Portland, Oregon with his wife, Guru Surya, and their dog, Remy. He works in construction and spends his free time making woodworking projects, biking, playing basketball, and the Indian drum called the tabla. Well, I want to welcome you, HarGobind. Thank you so much for joining our podcast today. Actually, I have you on mute. Let's unmute you.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Why do you feel it's important to share your story?
Well, after listening to Dudham's last week and speaking with him about it, it felt like an important, it was important to me to participate in the conversation regardless of how important I feel my story is directly to the topic. And though I had known his story, he's my best friend, hearing it through this medium gave me the context to actually listen to it in a new light. I really valued that.
I really value that perspective, and you're sharing that, because a part of creating this platform is that we open up the space to know that we all have a story and an experience, and it's not a hierarchy of pain or abuse or, well, I didn't experience as worse as that. It's we all have an experience, and our lived experience matters, and our lens is unique, and that might support somebody else in their own awakening.
Exactly. I think more context can only help.
Yeah,
Yeah. More
absolutely.
perspective.
Well, yes, thank you. And on that note, why don't you bring us back? Give us I know you in the intro it said where you were born, but I didn't get some sense of like when you went to India. So give us a little history of kind of the start and where you want to begin.
Yeah. So I was born in 1988, and I guess the start of my life was my name being given to me from Yogi Bhajan. And my brother has the same name as me, and he's 3 years older than me. And so he had been named 3 years earlier, and I was born, and my parents called him up, as they did back then, and asked him, so we just had a baby, can we have a name? And he said HarGobind, and they kind of took that, hung up, and then thought about it a little bit and called him back and asked, so just to clarify, we already have one. Is that our, do they both have the same name? And he said, yes, that's all that I can say is that's their name. And that made it kind of confusing. So we have our nicknames and our, so I go by Gobind often, or as I got my nickname in India, Little Dude.
All right.
So in that ashram, I don't remember a whole lot because I was from ages 1 to 3, and there was a few other families there, and I think some families had moved away by 1992, and my family being the last ones there sort of heard about the ashram that was more growing in Herndon and moved out there. And my brother and I started school there with kind of in a public school, and there was probably 10 or 12 families in a cul-de-sac there. So we had friends that were all Sikhs, and we all lived in this insular neighborhood. And I have good memories of it. I have a lot of times we would go, each house would have chanting, and so we would do chanting each night and go to the, it would rotate which house had the evenings chanting, and always having that smell of yogi tea and cookies. And yeah, I don't have a whole lot of memories from that time, but we would interact with the community, and not so much. I think I wasn't old enough that I had like a lot of friends outside of the community, but as I went to India in later years, my peers who stayed in America longer than I did form some friends. So it did interact a bit more than maybe the Espanola ashram or the Los Angeles ashram. It did interact with people who were not part of our community a bit more, from my understanding. So my experience was that I saw that some of the kids were going to India. I think I was only 5 or 6, and my brother and my parents sort of saw that was the thing to do. And so he went when he was 10, I believe, and I was only 7. And as soon as I saw him get on the plane and fly, I was like, I want to do that. I really want to do that. And I didn't think about it, because it's when you're 7 years old, you don't think what that means. So then I don't remember that year we did go and visit him in India, my father and I, and I had no context I just thought, oh, these kids are great. It's like, it's all great.
This is like 1992.
This is the last year of the Sant Singh Sukha Singh school. Yeah. Sorry. 94 to 95. And I visited, and it just reinforced my idea. Like, I got to come here and go to school here. It looks like a blast. I did hear that my brother had been assaulted by one of the staff members while I was in America, but at a 7-year-old mind, I don't hear what that means. And it wasn't, I mean, he had been physically abused by a staff in front of the entire school body. And it was, my parents were on the phone about it with the staff in India, and I just sort of, I didn't process it or think about what that meant. And it probably wasn't just him, you know, I think it happened more commonly to other students. And the staff member that did it was in his 20s, you know, and I don't think he had training for how to deal with kids. I don't think a lot of the staff that went there had any child development instruction or education in that. So that was my introduction to how it, you know, I had this one idea where it's beautiful and exciting and you're in India, and then I had this other piece in the back of my mind where it's like, oh, some bad stuff happens. So I still followed along with my desire to go, and I went when I was 8 years old, and that was the year that Dudham in his podcast, in his interview with you, recounted a little bit of the lack of control, the lack of organization that existed that year. And it's similar to what I've heard from people in one of the years at GNFC back in the day, where we just had houses around town and then a school building that was kind of semi under construction as we were in the building in school there. And I second everything Dudham said on his interview, where we were just free to do whatever we felt like doing at any time of the day, and we really did it. And again, it's a miracle that nothing beyond, you know, minor injuries. One major injury was to an older student named HarGobind also.
Whoa.
Which Dudham described as well in his interview, that he got knocked out from climbing on top of a bus, which we did every day, pretty much.
So that kid who had gotten knocked out and hit his teeth, that his name was HarGobind too.
Yeah, and he was my neighbor in Virginia. So
a lot of HarGobinds going around. And so your brother, if I understand correctly, had gone to India a few years earlier.
It's 1 year.
1 year earlier. So you're younger, he went a little earlier, and then you had heard while he is there and you're back in America that he had gotten physically assaulted by a staff member, but you're not fully processing that. You're only processing it on whatever level you're capable of. You still go. And so that first year you go is the time when, what you were talking about, when Dudham was explaining, there were houses that they were renting. There wasn't an actual like school property where you were living on the property. They were renting separate houses, and then you went to a particular school building.
Exactly. And in
that
the beginning,
chaotic year that he said was extra chaotic, that was your first year.
Yes, that was my introduction to it, which in some ways was like, this is awesome. Like, we can just do whatever we want.
Well, as a kid, yeah, it's like camp, right?
Yeah. I mean, our transportation in the beginning was basically a dump truck, and we would, 50 of us would pile into the back of the truck. It wasn't even a bus. And so we'd be transported to and from school in that. And then in towards the later half of the year, we got buses. But to look back on it and realize that my parents may not have been exercising their best judgment, and I didn't. I mean, as a 7-year-old, you don't know what you want. And I was just excited to go to India. But what weighs heavily the most on me is that I was extremely sad when I would leave. Like, I felt that disconnect, and I would cry a lot that I was missing my parents. And as soon as I was done feeling that sadness, I'd be like, okay, I'm all good now. Because that, the rush of endorphins that comes in when you're feeling sad to make you feel better just happened naturally. And I was like, I guess that's just part of life. I feel really, really sad and really awful, and then I'm great. So that was kind of a theme throughout my first, I would say 7 or 8 years in India, where I just feel this deep sadness of, I want to be with my parents, but this is life. I'm going to be with my friends, and I'm going to go to India every year. And looking back on that and seeing it with hindsight, I see that it was just painful, and I just let it be. It was just sad. It didn't need to be that way. I don't like that feeling, and I wouldn't. I see that as a my mom tried to sort of ask me, are you sure you want to go back? And I was always saying, yes, I do. I always want to go back. I want to go back every year, even though I had this pit in my stomach of like, I'll miss you. So that was hard.
Mm.
And yeah.
Do you feel like what you're reflecting on is like that you actually that was a feeling that you actually didn't want to go and that you were thinking you had to go? Or is it actually like, or is it a combination that you liked it and didn't? Like,
It's both of those. I liked it, and I
mhm.
didn't like the feeling of missing my parents, and I did feel like I hadn't even considered not going. So it was just that such a young kid, you're not thinking alternate, you don't have the decision making ability, I don't believe that I did, to um, to really weigh the options. Um, so yeah, that
So
was
I think you're just pointing out a really important point. As a child of the Dharma, you're talking about what, 1995 that you went,
yeah,
96 that you went. So we're
yeah,
talking about how many decades earlier, right? Several decades earlier of generations of us children going to school in India. And so there's a camaraderie in that, there's a bonding in that, there's this ethos of like, that's what we do. And I'm kind of hearing that in you. I didn't go to school in India, but I remember the longing of the fact that, gosh, we were the only kids left behind, and the feeling of that, you know. Um, I know it weighed heavier on my older brother than on me, but anyway, I want to just name that, because when we grow up in something, I think sometimes people that don't grow up in our community don't understand the gravity of that longing, of the longing of this is what we do. It's a part of being a Khalsa, right?
yeah,
And then also the missing of the parents and thinking that, oh, it's okay, maybe I just shouldn't feel that feeling.
exactly. And I got the sense that I might be one of the only people feeling it, even though I'm sure I was not. I got the sense that all these other people, like my brother and all my friends, sort of, they don't I don't see them feeling these feelings, so it must be
Mm.
me, and it'll go away.
Well, I think that actually illuminates a lot too, right? Is that nobody else was showing what they were feeling either, and that became a common thing in our in the ethos too, is that we kept our feelings internal because that's
Yeah,
not a safe thing to share.
yeah, absolutely. Um,
Thank you for that.
yeah, I so I think I would would say that after that year, um, things started to get a bit more organized. After that, my first year in India, and um, by the time, I mean, this skips quite a few years, but by the time I was in 8th grade, which is 5 years into my school year there, I I found that I was really appreciating a few aspects of being at the school in India. While I was in India, I was appreciating learning the tabla. I was appreciating learning Kundalini yoga, and I don't remember any particular subject that I in school that academics, I don't remember feeling like this is my thing. I really like X. Um, so I latched on pretty 110% onto yoga, meditation, the martial art that we did there, and tabla. So I was much more in the like spiritual life aspect. And I think what I've looked back on is that gave me some peace of like being able to integrate what these heavy emotions I was feeling into a spirituality that I wanted to process my feelings through rather than any other way, because that was my main avenue for saying this makes me feel good. I can I can do this. And um, I did have a bit of a reputation of like being a goody good, or like people would jokingly say like, little dude, he's a yogi. um, and I felt self-conscious about that. I felt like that's not, I shouldn't feel that, because you're supposed to feel humble, you're supposed to feel
Mm.
and I did feel better then, and I did feel superior, because what I was subscribing to was the belief that the more meditation, the more yoga, the more X of this subject that you do, the better of a person you are, regardless of anything else. That that the meditation is more important than anything after that.
Mm.
And so I dove in pretty deep, and by the time I was in, again, this is skipping a few years, but I was in 12th grade. I wasn't applying to colleges. I hadn't really pursued any academics. I did fine. I had, a 4.0, or I got straight A's every once in a while. And I was way more into the spiritual life. And so Jagat Guru, recognizing that, asked, "Hey, we're looking for more staff." So I was 18 years old, and they asked if I wanted to come back and staff member as soon as after the summer. And my initial thought was absolutely, because I just love this, and there's always more I can do, and I don't have any other option. I didn't think, I want to go to college, and if I did think I wanted to go to college or talk about that with my parents, I thought I can do that after. I can do this a little bit, and I can always do school later, but this is the most important thing to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came back in my one condition, because I had seen some of my older students come back and jump right in from being a student to being a staff member, and it's not a quick or easy transition if you are placed in the role of caretaker, let alone not having training in it. I could see that as a student, that someone would come back and you're immediately supposed to be taking care of these kids and looking after them. And that's not an easy transition. So I made that a point that I didn't want to be in that position. I was just the assistant to Jagat Guru, and I would lead physical fitness, like PT in the morning, and Gatka classes, and I would take care of the Gurdwara, and those were basic duties that I would. And at the same time, I would teach yoga frequently, and sometimes during the academic day, they would have the humanology classes.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely, I again just dove even deeper into it, and I feel like I was I was forming more of a philosophy for life, that everything was funneled through my belief that there were 7 steps to happiness, that there were these specific teachings that I don't know how to emphasize this. I know I'm saying it many, many times, but that I was definitely just trying to build myself up with that foundation, with the foundation of you do exactly how HarGobind laid everything out. And I was enjoying myself in it. I was feeling that I was, improving, whatever that meant. And my relationship with Jagat was positive, and I felt that he was a mentor to me, and what I was learning from him was how to conduct myself as a spiritual person, and how to practice HarGobind's teachings better.
Mm-hmm.
So that lasted for 4 years, and by the 4th year, I would say, I felt the stories I was hearing, whether it was from Jagat or any staff members or teachers who would come and teach, were very repetitive. There was no spontaneity or like new language coming forth. I don't know how to like
in the stories they're talking about, like in the yogic language and the spiritual philosophies, you're saying nothing, it's just like regurgitated. There's not new inspiration and stories coming from their lives.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I it didn't discount, like I still felt 110% gung ho that this was, the best thing that a person could do. This was the life. And I had just that thing in the back of my head of like, well, I've heard that story 25 times, and I've heard that perspective 50 times, and I've heard that. And I, at the same time, my now wife, was in America. She had graduated years before, and we were doing a long distance relationship, and I wanted to pursue that relationship. So part of what was pulling me to leave the school was wanting to be with her, because it was either I stay at the school and we're not together, or I move back to America. And so that was there was two aspects to it. There was the, like, do I want to make this living at the school my whole life and teaching and move forward with this, when something in the back of my head told me, like, I don't know what the rest, is this just it? Am I just going to do this? Or do I want to move back to America? And I didn't want to move back to America. I wanted to stay and just stay where I was. I knew what life was like, and I knew what was comfortable. And I had a conversation with Jugget where I told him I'm thinking of moving back. I'm not going to come back next year. And he was very understanding of it. There wasn't a hint of resentment. There wasn't. He just said, like, well, we were going to put you into the Mukhya Jatadar position where you would be directly in charge of kids. And I was like, well, I'm glad that I'm leaving because I would probably be horrible. And so I moved back, and I had a sense that I wanted to, continue this lifestyle of teaching yoga, of living the same way that I lived in India, but in America. And very quickly, over the next couple of years, I realized that was not possible. The school where I was for 14 years of my life at MPA was this insular bubble where the reason that I had the practice and lifestyle that I had was because it was all that was happening. It wasn't what I believe now to be discipline, because there wasn't a choice of, well, do I do this or do I do that? And how do I sort out my priorities? It was 100% focused towards the schedule. And I craved that. I loved that schedule, and I loved that structure that kept me, in line. And if I just do this and then I do that and then this happens. And so in America, I felt that that structure was completely lacking. And I did continue practicing my yoga and my meditation with the knowledge that it was different. And I again go back to the mindset that I still struggled with, which was, the more meditation and yoga you do, the better of a person you are, regardless of what else you're doing. And I think that was the part that I struggled with the most in America. Was I don't like doing this without that structure. I don't like doing the yoga. I don't like doing the meditation without this, the student body and all the staffs there. It felt like a lot promoting more of it. So I think what I was getting at was that it was more of that sense of, I was held in that, and it wasn't necessarily me. I was just held in that flow of schedule. And so without that, I was redefining or refiguring out how I do that and create that for myself, while fitting things that I had never had to do into my life. Doing laundry, cooking my own meals, cleaning up after myself, doing things that, when I worked at the school in India, we had people cleaning the facilities, everything. And we had the dining hall where food was always ready. We had this structure around us that you didn't have to think about what you were going to do or how you were going to make it. That's.
It sounds like the transition back to America was really challenging, because it was a 14-year segment of your life, and really from a very young age.
Sorry.
It's okay. From a very young age to, a young adult, and then you're suddenly in America. And what I'm hearing you say is that some of these choices, you realize, wow, that wasn't actually my discipline. it was an environment that was supporting me to be a disciplined yogi and show up for myself in these ways. But when you had to introduce all the other things that life really entails,
Hmm.
that was a more of a challenge. You didn't necessarily have those tools available to you, or you didn't even want to use the tools that you thought you wanted to use.
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to the superiority complex, which I think I had made for myself, where I looked down upon anyone who didn't practice the same way we did in India, and that included 3HO, Americans.
So I want to just put a flag in that and say, by no means did you create that for yourself. I can understand why you put it on yourself, because I also similarly have put that on myself, right? But that's so much a part of what we grew up in. We grew up in this kind of veil of unconscious superiority complex around, we have this special knowledge, right? We have this special technology. This technology is just going to change the world. And the way that it actually lands in each one of us, I think, can show up differently, but it's personalized. And we think, oh, I did that, when really it was an ethos that impacted us.
I believe that 100%. I read a book recently called Upstream, and its philosophy is a system results in exactly what it is designed to create. There's no like, oh, the system is broken, we need to fix it. Whatever comes out of it, that was what was designed for it to create. And it may be good or bad, and whatever it creates is, there's actors who can do different things within that system, but you can't say the system is broken because it produced something, and that is exactly how it was designed. And so exactly what you're saying, when I look at what was produced in my mind, or my philosophy, was a result of my environment.
And I think a very intentional choice for the school to put a focus on that. Over many years, that wasn't necessarily the previous year's focuses, right? As we're hearing tales, and there was a time when it got more structured, and the structure actually was the body of work that we're going to integrate Kundalini yoga, right? And so by the time kids graduate, they're going to be certified as teachers, and we're going to integrate other levels of kind of like discipline. And I don't know, I'd like to hear it because you were a staff. But looking from the outside in, I started teaching at the yoga festival, European Yoga Festival, in like 2016, 17. And I have to be honest, I was really impressed when they did the mitty pitty announcement, and they had the kids come out and they did their bhangra moves, and they're just regal and beautiful and radiant, and it was so symbolic of what I felt was the training I remember getting grown up in.
Yeah.
And here it is in 2016, 17, 18, being shown as like a marketing tool to kind of like, this is why you want to send your children to the school, because your children will come out as radiant, strong souls ready to face the Aquarian transition. And we know we have the tools that's going to change the world, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm hearing this in your story almost with a deep level of sadness behind it. Like, you got wrapped up and you realize, wow, I was actually doing that as a way to manage a lot of emotions that I've been feeling since 7 and didn't know how to actually feel, because I didn't know how to get help to feel.
Yeah. The catch 22 of it to me is that meditation is a good thing. And in concert with other things like going to therapy, which I am doing, and using different tools at your disposal, it is possible to practice meditation in a bad way, which can create all further neuroses. But exactly
Such a good point. Oh, and I think that it's worthy of noting that many of us that grew up in this dharma, whether it's meditation or yoga or any realm of that, we might have an association that was actually trained in a negative association or a trauma response, consciously or unconsciously. And we can use that. It can show up as over discipline. That's how it showed up in my life.
Hmm.
over disciplined, over cultivated in my navel center, in my will, kind of like a shutdown of my emotional body and an overdevelopment of my navel point is how I noticed it.
Hmm.
And I say that because most people in the world that I teach aren't overdeveloped in their navel point. They're underdeveloped. So a lot of the tools that I've know to strengthen that area are wonderful tools, but any tool could be used too much and then it's a weapon of destruction or of trauma. So like a hammer is a tool, but it can also be used to kill or to abuse, similar to the way I think maybe we might be relating to meditation or yoga or things that are very rich, but also we could have used to shield our emotions because we didn't get support to feel all that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
I want you to go there with me because you ran through some years,
Yeah.
but go in there at 7, some part of you arrived and realized, holy smokes, now I know what my brother, something, like give us more of a sense of like, what was it like for you as a child? Because I'm hearing the resilience, I'm hearing how our Dharma supported you, quote, right? To not feel, but to use yoga and meditation as a way to really create what it sounds like is when you started practicing Kundalini yoga meditation, really hardcore, that was your first sense of support. It was the first place you got to go and feel supported, and that was inside of you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I still look back on that as, if it wasn't going to be that, it could have been any number of other things. And I'm redefining how to practice that now, because like I said, the yoga and the meditation of it they're not implicitly bad. It's the associations with them or the parts of them that are, like you said, overdeveloped to compensate for things that you are not addressing that bring us away from ourselves. So I feel like brought me away from myself.
And me too.
Yeah.
Me too. I think, and the more we shared our story, we realized, wow, yeah, I wasn't allowed to feel that either. What did I do instead?
Mm-hmm.
What did I do to?
Yeah. I want to explore that too with the understanding that the aspects that I experienced of the positivity from things like, I mean, when I would get into my tabla or practicing my martial art, there aren't necessarily any negative associations with those things, because I played tabla and I would feel such a deep sense of ecstasy that would bleed into other parts of my life, where if I'm struggling or if I'm missing my parents or if I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, these practices were unstructured and were just done from joy, and that they brought that. I just feel like it was expressed so purely from me,
Mm, mm.
without needing to be told, like, this is how you do it, this is how you should feel when you do it, this is, it was unstructured, and I found my expression with those things.
Do you feel like that wasn't the same, say, in your practice with Kundalini yoga because there was more definition to it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember one particular time playing tabla, and it was about 1 or 2 in the morning, because we were doing a program early, and I played, and I just felt like I was on top of the world. And then I had to take a nap afterwards because I had only slept from 10 p.m. till 1 a.m. And then I woke up and I felt like what I believe the opposite of a hangover to be, where I was like still floating, and it wasn't from anything in particular, and I didn't have to rely on what other people said about what it was to tell me that it was good for me.
Mm, mm.
And again, there's that there's that judgment I place on myself for not wanting to feel too superior then, you know, and feeling these expressions of like, I felt this high ecstasy. I think I would generally attach a feeling of, well, nobody else can experience this, so I must be special. And that again runs back to the theme of we're giving you this technology, what we were taught as students, to save the world. And I've grown, like I expressed, some of the reason why I felt it was healthy to leave the school was I now have this deep appreciation for explaining things in new language, because I heard things explained with the same language for years. And it doesn't have to be any specific way of saying something. You can say it, and the more you can say it with your own words, the more you can identify it as something coming from you.
Meaning you're not just taking it as is, you're taking it, you're interpreting through the lens of the experience of your own soul's experience, your lived experience, and then adding your piece to it as it goes back out into the world.
Exactly. And I think because I held so deeply onto the structure of, these are the 7 steps for happiness, they have to be spoken in this way. These are the rules for life. They have to be, you know, repeated just like this, because this is the teachings.
Don't change them. It has to be just like this, right?
Exactly. And there's a serious part of me, and I recognize that. And when I speak to peers, I explore it of why, you know, why does it have to be so? Why can't it change? Why does it have to be exactly as it was taught? That's a lifelong process.
Yeah, good inquiry. So you're asking these questions of yourself and noticing these this level of inquiry when you're a staff member at Mitty Pitty. And, you know, I'm assuming that as a kid going through, you had some levels of abuse or witness abuse, or there was just a constant culture of abuse, and you're kind of brushing through it like it's no big deal, or like we've all heard it already. But I just want to say that we haven't. Like, we don't really have a sense of what I think is like a sense of normal for you a bit.
Okay.
And it helps us to kind of get that context so that we know the headspace of what you went in as a staff member, because you were very clear. I'm not going to be in that role over kids because I don't want to end up in some cycle.
The things that come to mind, and the reason I felt also compelled, again, starting from why I want to share my story, was the things that come to mind are things that Dedham covered, and I want to cover again, like you're saying, is when I first went, my introduction was, you know, regularly being woken up from my sleep with, someone peeing on me, to put it bluntly, or waking up and having toothpaste smeared on some part of my clothes and not knowing who did it or why they did it. And not telling anyone about it, because who am I going to tell? And not asking, like, who was that, or digging into it to try to figure out who did it, because it would just invite more.
And just the constancy of that.
I don't remember it as constant. I remember it as isolated incidents. But someone said something really, it super resonated with me on one of the first Zoom calls when all this was starting. I forget who said it. I wish I could remember. They said, whether it happened to you, whether you did it to somebody, or whether you saw it happen, it's all in your mind as pain being caused to somebody that, how did they say it? Pain being caused to somebody that didn't have to be caused. And you knew that somewhere.
Yeah. And it doesn't just register in our mind, our nervous systems hold it. Our memory holds it. Hearing the stories on Zoom for me, and not having gone to India, but having gone to Solstice and Ladies Camp, and feeling like I had the camaraderie of my peers through the camps and the tantrics.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing to me how much the stories, like the memory was in my body when I heard people's stories of that. Like, if it didn't happen to you, it happened around you, it happened, it happened to each other. And it reminds me of like the same reason why, as the teachings, why we play mantra in the room. We play it because it's a permeating sound current that we're absorbing all the time through our cellular consciousness, right?
Yeah.
And this is the weight of what I'm feeling and what you're sharing, is like it just absorbed in the atmosphere. And by the time there was more structure, it's like you slurped into it. Like, I'm going to focus on yoga. If this is the answer and these are the teachings, I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Yep. I would say that's how I think of it now. The abuse part's the reason I'm saying that they feel like isolated incidents, is that and when we all get together, different groups of us talk about, yeah, this happened, that happened, and our memories of it, we kind of isolate these incidents in our minds, I think, to provide, like, this story is there, and to give it concrete, a way to process it. But it's sort of just picking and choosing which stories, and not the overall feeling, which I think I really honestly don't remember the overall feeling. If it was this constant state of fear, I don't believe that I felt always afraid that the next, blow would fall. I may have felt that way, but that's the thing about memory. It's very tricky.
Well,
And
I think also that we have to understand that fear, if we like context it, fear is a real base emotion. It's a survival emotion. So it's an animal instinct, and it's like a primal emotion. So it's not necessarily one like, oh my gosh, I'm conscious that I'm afraid. It's more just, it becomes a part of the hypervigilance of being in our body.
yeah,
And with the amount of kind of like the constancy of like, of just chaos and commotion, that's base survival,
mm-hmm.
and then thinking there might be attacks and all the other ice. I think those kind of might have been like large things that stand out, but because there's like a constancy of like survival mode.
Yeah, and what stands out the most to me is what I shared about constantly being afraid that I won't see my parents again. It's 9 months at a time.
Wow. So you remember feeling that feeling of like, I'm not sure if I'll ever see them again. Like, oh, wow. Now, where's your older brother? He's in school with you this whole time?
Yeah, he's 3 years older than me, so he graduated maybe 4 years. He graduated 4 years before I did, and he went back to the States. And yeah, to share a little bit about that, he had a psychotic break when he was 22. I want to say maybe he was 21, and he's dealt with bipolar for the last, I want to say, what was I, 15 years almost. And at the time that he first had his episode, he was reading from the Siddhi Guru Granth Sahib.
Take your time.
So that was hard to say it lightly. I was a staff member when I heard. I was in India, and I think it really shook me to my core that can happen even while he's, supposed to be held in this light of.
Mm. Mm.
If he was reading from the Guru and it happened, then, maybe none of us are protected.
Mm. Kind of like piercing myths a little bit in your own consciousness around what's possible, how we're protected, how our
Yeah.
relationship is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I didn't think I would talk about that. So moving forward with him dealing with that, and me, again, me being so all the way around the world.
Yeah, totally incapable of doing anything.
Yeah. When I would practice from then on, I would think, this is not a cure-all. I would think this is not, this yoga and meditation is one aspect, but knowing that his genetics and maybe his upbringing and, combination of nature and nurture helped to grant him this disease. It made it very real that could happen to me. And I don't think I've ever been as scared of anything.
Mm.
And I don't think I've ever been as relieved in in going through the process of therapy to understand a little bit about it.
Mm.
And to believe and have faith that that's not my future.
Mm.
And that's through years of work and wanting to explore how that may have been detrimental to believe that, again, it's not a unique concept, but our failure as a community to understand mental health.
Truth. And the actual training against it in the early years. I don't know if that still goes on. I know that there's a lot of teachers that are, mental health therapists now, but in the early years, there was actually training against getting therapists, and that yoga was the only way, and do this meditation. And so it's like growing up in this, again, I just want to hold you in that this isn't a personal ethos that you gleaned as your unique survival technique, although I know how much it can feel that way, because the unwinding that I've done that I thought was uniquely my soul's work, and then this community exposure has made me realize, wow, this is complex PTSD, and we collectively have it. And to start naming that in ourselves and to unwinding, wow, I thought this sensation was enlightenment, and it's actually just deprivation. It's not enlightenment at all.
Absolutely.
To be trained in the opposite is actually a psychosomatic disconnect, that through therapy, through understanding mental health, we can start to reconnect these parts and learn that, wow, yeah, things that we've been trained, overly trained. They don't have to produce these sensations. We can feel, we can be safe to feel all these feelings and not be trained out of our humanity.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that is definitely one of the most important things to me is yeah, I think to emphasize that the discussion around mental health can't be ignored.
Right. Right. This feels like it might be a jump of topics, but in one of those books I'm learning about trauma, and it's called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, and he talks a lot about the nervous system. And in my unwinding from overtraining in Kundalini yoga as well, I've had to learn things about my nervous system that I thought one thing because of my training. And then I've learned, oh, wow, that's actually not the complete truth. That's only like a slice of truth. And I've had to come back. And so in that book, he talks about how when we're learning our nervous system and we're feeling certain kind of volatile, rageful, angry emotions, that's the time when we want to charge the energy outward, do martial arts, do a movement, something that's dispersing the energy, go for a run, but not to sit and do meditation, because that's when you're turning the energy inward. And that's a part of, I think, this great unwind is realizing, wow, when we feel really harsh, volatile emotions, whether it's grief or anger or rage or whatever's coming up, that we have such unconscious default training to turn that inward and sit with it because it wasn't safe to bring it anywhere. And that's a really hard unwind. And I want to say that out loud because I've had to physically unwind that out of my nervous system through therapy and support. And it was almost opposite of what I was trained to do in my Kundalini yoga training.
Yeah, I hear you. And like I mean that relates to the part about feeling like I could express myself through physical things like playing tabla or doing martial arts, or the thing that I learned when I was 7 years old and I had a caretaker in my first year in India. She taught us breakdancing.
Exactly.
And I definitely felt that when I would be, doesn't matter how good you are, but when I would be dancing and feeling like I felt parts of my body lighting up in ways that it doesn't matter how you define it. If you say Kundalini, or if you say, you're just feeling it or you're vibing with it, you're expressing things in your body that need to come out. And they can be in any infinite form of ways.
Mm-hmm. And the myriad of expressions and how they will change depending on what's needing to come out at any given time, that there's not one right form or function of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like when you came back to the US, you started processing and having a lot of kind of questions. You're starting to court your woman, and then so some years later, obviously, then all this. So let us know what happened in that time, and then how did you feel with all this information coming out with the Premka book? Like, give us a light into the transition into the present.
I don't think I really started thinking about all of this until 10 months ago. As much as the transition to coming from MPA and living in the States might have given me pause to reflect on my life philosophy, I still had this part in my brain, which I'm ashamed to admit, was it doesn't matter what HarGobind did, my practice and my experience are solid, and nothing will ever change that.
Wow. I want to just pause and say that's a common thought. That's
yeah.
in that one.
Yeah. And I didn't want to start this process. It wasn't something that was a choice, or I was like, okay, now I'm going to start feeling like everything in my life is questionable. It's not my
Wake up
choice.
and decide you wanted that one.
And I see such value in it, even though it's painful. I see again, the ways that it's enabling me to explore with my own language, through my own body, to say the things that I'm actually feeling, and not push that on others, but just say, this is how I feel.
Tremendous.
So I mean, going back to when I was baptized, similar to Dudham into Sikhism, I remember there was even talk of all of the abuse of HarGobind sleeping with his secretaries. And I said that to Dudham the day I was baptized. I said, maybe it's true. I agreed that, like, yeah, maybe he did sleep with them, and maybe, in my mind, it's a consensual relationship, which I, hadn't even explored the possibility of it not being consensual. I'm 17, and I say, maybe it's true, but that doesn't change how I feel about me practicing my practice, or my, sticking to these things that I hold so dear. And I also relate it to, as all of these stories started coming out, I had this pendulum held up here for so long, and everything started to come out, of, I started to realize, like, okay, this was not consensual, and it was happening, and it was abusive, and it was not in line with what I thought I was practicing, not in line with what I thought he was teaching. And this pendulum started to swing, and I have this need in me to not let it swing to the other side. And that's painful to, because there's a fear that if it swings to the other side, I'll be what I have judged in the past of, oh, this person lost their faith, they lost their practice, they dropped, their strength. Because how many times in Ardas did we say, did I say personally, please bless Siri Singh Savana, his whole title, he is thy most humble servant, and feel it and believe it, and living by that life philosophy, that if you doubt that, you're just in the grip of some poisonous, that's not going to go away in another 10 months. I think it's going to be years.
You mean for this to start being dissolving inside of you, to be?
Yeah, I believe it's dissolving inside of me,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a large structure, and deconstructing it, because my choice is not to just explode it, which some people is just blow it up and start from zero. I feel like my choice is to deconstruct it with a consciousness that I can see the parts that are coming out one by one. That may change.
Absolutely. And any way that it happens for you is your right way. I just find it so beautiful that you're facing that with, like, eyes wide open, heart wide open, and saying, wow, the whole structure of my view of life is called into question, and who am I beyond this veil? And rather than jump that cliff, it's like, I'm going to walk steadily, and I'm going to feel the ground beneath me.
Yeah.
I think you've just brought up some really, really just important points in your shared story and your shared experience, that I can feel that you're actually, like, in real time processing.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's just so not easy to share ourselves in these vulnerable spaces where we don't have it all figured out. We just know that what was no longer exists, and what's becoming is the question. But I'm here, I'm present with that process, and it sounds like you're so right there with that. And it's It's courageous. And I really invite listeners to hear this, because to me, this is what it means to have conversations about our experiences. It's not about analyzing and figuring it all out. It's just saying, whoa, I see a hole poked here. Here's another hole poked, and things are dissolving, and I don't want it all to disintegrate. I want to have a sense of myself along the way.
Yeah. I appreciate that so much.
I appreciate you. I appreciate our community so much. Having been born and raised in the community, I was born in 1977. You were born in 1988, you said? 1988. And it's so funny because I feel like we know each other, but we don't know how we know each other, and that this is just the case in like what it means to grow up like us. And if you don't grow up in our community, you don't feel that level of depth of like what it means to have like this level of brotherhood and sisterhood, in such a unique depth of bonds. But what I'm reminded is that we really know each other like through children's camps, or like your mom took care of me when I was a baby, or my mom took care, it's like we really actually have a level of intimacy from childhood through, and we don't really even understand or know it fully. Like, of course, we know who we're friends with, but I just mean like fully.
Right. Yeah, I can meet up with somebody who went to school in GNFC and immediately we'll talk for 4 hours without a beat. And we didn't know each other before that, but it just becomes this, we know the same people and we know the same experience, and we have an ability to connect on a level that isn't tangible.
Yeah.
But I do want to hear about your story of.
All right. Well, I was going to tell us, but I was going to go there. So what I was going to share was that even though we don't know each other, I heard you talk on some Zoom call, and I realized that I knew your mom. And I was 16. It was my last solstice. And I was a guide at children's camp to do like as a pay to be able to do one day of tantric. And so I'm a guide at the children's camp, and my left hip goes out and I can't walk. And so I'm debilitated. I'm laying in my tent, and they're going to like take me down to like Khalsa chiropractic or whatever to see if he can get me walking. And your mom comes into my tent because she's some sort of healer who's been sent to my tent to help me. Anyway, it was just really interesting because she's some sort of energy healer. And she says to me, "Are you sexually active?" And I was like, "No." And she was like, "Well, you have so much sexual energy in your body, you're going to need to learn how to move that energy around in you, or it's going to cause a lot of debilitating problems later in your life." And I'm like, okay, thanks. And so she's like, "I suggest you do hip circles." And so she shows me like this slow kind of feminine hip circle thing. And of course, we do some of these things in Kundalini yoga, but my sense of Kundalini yoga in my body was the very active, masculine, disciplined, it was like very sharp, it was penetrative, and that was just a very different feeling. Anyway, her little thing has stayed with me for my whole life, because this theme has really been a thing, for my body and my healing of balancing my own masculine and feminine energy. And I found it quite odd that at that time there would be somebody that would talk about sexual energy at all, because I didn't find that many people were that open about it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I was just talking to my mom and relaying to her that I feel like she's always been a bit of a rebel. She was taking, again, like I think I got my love of martial arts from her. When I was really young, she was taking kung fu and karate, and
She wore turban different early on.
yeah, exactly. You know her. You do know her. Yeah.
And she stood out to me. Again, she had just a real different vibe. And that hip circle thing, like it wasn't until like 2015 that it came back around for me, of really that same thing. And I realized, wow, I've been dealing with this balance my masculine and feminine energy in my body. And she was one of the first people to point that out. And it's a lifelong theme. It's a part of what I teach on in terms of like really using getting in touch with our sexuality and our emotional body as a way to fuel and heal heal our trauma, not cut these things off, because they are the life force that juices our system.
Exactly.
Thank your mama.
I do.
Yeah, so I'm so grateful for our community for this reason, for lots of reasons, but one of them is this, is the connections that will never leave us because they're a part of our experience.
Yeah.
On that note, I want to share your song. Do you want to give us an intro to it, or should we just play?
You can just play it.
All right, we're going to share HarGobind's intro song here before we end this episode. So let's see. Thank you so much for that beautiful music, that beautiful share today. In ending, HarGobind, do you want to give us a lens into where from here, even your perspective on having spent so much time in India and having worked at Midipidi? Do you feel like, obviously that's a contentious issue right now, do you feel like it's a school that should keep going forward? Do you feel like the experience, the cultural and experience makes up for the academics that it doesn't have? What's your lens on that for now?
I would say I don't think it should continue as it is. There's nothing that can make up for it. That's why it's called Miri Piri. It's supposed to be both. there's nothing that can make up for. And I haven't been there in 10 years. When I hear, and I shared this with people on both sides of the aisle, when I hear attacks on it, I feel defensive of it. And when I hear pushback against the attacks on it, I feel the opposite. So, I mean, from just how I've seen it, and again, not being involved in 10 years, but knowing what I know, a minimum of a accreditation or training, you know, I see value in it, but I don't see value in it at the expense of anything. If it's sacrificing anything to give that value, I don't see that. So I think I want to participate in the discussion about it for the sake of lending my voice of, you know, mental health and understanding more about science and understanding that while it may put yoga and spirituality at the forefront of the education, that is just one aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's super important. And I think that the context of that we don't have the current day perspective, and yet as long as all the pieces of the puzzle that really makes it a formative school and putting mental health at the forefront, the children's needs, the academics, all the aspects of it, and that these conversations can be had transparently. And that's what's really important, because as a community, I think it's such a valuable aspect of so many of the children's experience in the Dharmas to have an international world and to count this aspect of our life. People don't get it. They don't get how much this is this is what makes us, is this worldly aspect. And I didn't go to school in India, and I still got this worldly aspect, because it's what happens when you grow up, when your brothers and sisters go to school when they're 5, 6, 7.
Absolutely.
It's the thing, right? And there's value and beautiful experiences that we draw, but it doesn't take away from the traumatic experience that can coexist with it.
Yeah.
And we have to support all of that if our children are going to keep going.
Yeah. Yep. I have a love that I don't think will go away, that I want to fight to preserve.
Yeah, the richness, the sweetness of your heart, HarGobind, where it's like, oh, when I hear this side, I'm like, I want to defend. When I hear this side, it's like, oh, and it's both, and like standing in both.
Yeah, I think the word that I'm gonna live with for the foreseeable future is ambivalence.
Tell us about ambivalence.
I mean, ever since 10 months ago the process started, it's the essence of cognitive dissonance, where you can see both and hold these conflicting, and that's a struggle for me, is holding, you know, each person's experience as theirs, and mine cannot discount somebody else's. But it's impossible to fully hold somebody else's when mine is so strong in me. But I'm not going to give up on that. You know, I'm not going to say this person's isn't important because mine is all there is. So I feel ambivalent in that I have lived so strongly up till 10 months ago in this strong mindset, and I have also come to see the abuses in the light that I have seen them now, and the corruption and the disgrace, the hypocrisy, and all the negative sides of them the way I see them now. And I don't see one as better or more right. I just see it as they're both important, and I need to move forward with what I have now and understand that the people who are not moving forward with me are equally valid.
You mean in their choice to stay wherever they're at?
Yeah.
Well, they're equally valid because that's who they are, right? But in terms of speaking speaking truth, we have to let people be wherever they're at in whatever stage they're at. I can be with you there. I feel like as a community though, we've perfected looking at one aspect and have it and are very uncomfortable dealing with uncomfortable emotions.
Yeah.
And we're learning to hold each other here. We're learning how to be like, wow, I don't know how to hold you in disagreement, but I think I still love you.
Yep.
To have public disagreement, right? Or public discord.
Yeah. The thing that I don't want to do is agree to disagree, because that's
I find that terrible. It feels like it's a non-dealing with of something.
exactly. I think that, I mean, Dunham and I bond so much over when we talk to each of our dads respectively, the difficulty in engaging them, and you know what engaging someone who disagrees with you so hard means. Is it for you so that you can feel better about yourself? Is it for them so that they can see the way that you want them to see? Or you know, how does that process go, and how active do you need to be with somebody who you definitely love and want to continue a relationship with, but it's a fundamental disagreement?
So that leads me to ask, what were your parents' response to because that I have no idea.
Right. My mom is the easiest person to talk to about it. I love talking to her about it. She's on the same page as me, and I that's that, you know, you can tell where I'm at from this whole discussion. And my dad is one of the hardest people to talk to about it, because I think there's that he just he keeps HarGobind on his altar, and he keeps that, you know, basically where I was when I left the school in India, of like, you just keep going, and that consistency, and you know, not dealing with it, or you know, dealing with it in a way that I don't relate to.
Mm. So would you say he's a denier? He actually like denies all that. And then your mom, and are they together still?
Yes. No.
Okay, I was thinking like, wow, how do they do that?
I know. I mean, that's the thing. I've realized there are probably many couples who are living together who disagree, and that's its own fight.
Right. Right. Whew. Yeah, I'm blown away by hearing the complexity of the families, the various families. And you're like, wow,
Yeah.
we have it all so different, but the similar,
Yeah. Thank you so much. I've
Thank
enjoyed this. I
Thank
mean, I haven't enjoyed it, but there's so much value in it.
Well, we've enjoyed you, and you're allowing us into your vulnerability in these areas you're in real time grappling with is such an honor. It's very humbling to witness you here, and thank you for coming here and in the midst of the process.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it makes a difference. So
Thank you.
anything else you'd like to say to my listeners before we go?
No, I'm pretty happy with everything I've said.
Well, it's been a pleasure to connect with you. Thank you all for tuning in. This is the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community. Be sure to like us on all platforms and review and rate us. Spread the word, share it, and don't forget your story matters. So if you'd like to share your story, please join us in a future episode.